You are now listening to the fastest show on IE Sports Radio. My name is Daryl Kinsey Jr. Welcoming you to another lap of the Extra Mile for today. A very special episode on December 9th, 2021. Usually this would be the time where I would allow my co-hosts to introduce themselves. But I'm going to introduce everybody because we're kind of on a time limit. Here's a special edition of the show. So we got Christopher Lehman, Michael Ward, and joining us from Set Point, Teran Rodriguez is with us, and we're going to talk about a very special F1 race. We originally weren't going to talk this race, Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. You know, last week was our season finale episode, and then the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix happened, and just everything happened, and we're going to get into it here. I want to thank everyone for joining me post-season to discuss this. And I'll start with the regular folks first, then we'll get to our special guest. Guys, I don't know where to even start with this race, to be honest.
I think the best place to start would be to talk just the track. We saw it live in action, and I think that I speak for all of us when I say that this track is dangerous. It is too fast. There are too many blind corners, and those street style is fun to race at. There is a certain degree of danger that comes with that, and this track just seems like the most dangerous track that we went to all year. And I told you this, Daryl. I think someone's going to get killed here, or we're going to have a career-ending injury from an accident.
Well, we almost saw somebody get killed, a couple people get killed with the racing that we saw this weekend. Michael, what was your first thoughts after the checker flag flew in Jeddah?
Honestly, this was chaotic. I honestly didn't really know how to feel because the race to me was entertaining, but it was entertaining for the wrong reasons. It wasn't entertaining because of the race. It was entertaining because of all the drama that was happening, the stuff with the rules. It's very worrisome, especially with some of the crashes that happened. And honestly, guys, I would have to agree with those 7 F1 drivers that decided to say, hey, I don't think this race should be a thing. I don't think this race should be a thing.
And Teran, you saw Chris and I's reactions in our little iSports Radio group chat on Twitter as the race was going on. And for a lot of those folks that are in there, all of our show hosts from across the platform are in there. For a lot of them, it was probably their first experience hearing us talk about F1, but it was, you could tell our reactions. I don't know if you were actually watching the race at the same time. What was your reaction to just everything that went down?
So I didn't even know there was actually a racetrack in Saudi Arabia, and I was rather surprised they actually decided to have a race up down there. But I saw the whole track and whatnot, and I'm like, yeah, this isn't really the most safest place to drive at. And I'm surprised Formula One didn't even listen to what the drivers had to say, because the number one priority, as I've said in past shows, should be driver safety. Like, no one wants to get hurt or lose their career or worse when it comes to a race like this. And obviously there was things that happened during the race that you'll probably get into, but I'm just rather surprised that this whole thing still transpired and whatnot. And the race itself was still mind-blowing to me. Like, I'm still having trouble processing what happened in said race.
Yeah, and I know everyone wants to talk about that incident, but we'll get to that at the end. We're going to go through everything else first, and it really started from when Mick Schumacher hit the wall early in the race, which brought out a caution flag. A lot of the cars, including the Mercedes duo, decide to come in and change tires. Max Verstappen does not. Few laps later, the red flag comes out. Usually, that wouldn't be of much importance, except for in Formula One, and put a pin in this because I want to talk about something at the end when it comes to the officiating. In Formula One, you can change tires under the red flag, which effectively gave Max Verstappen free tire choice for the restart. Lando Norris came out and said it was dumb. A lot of people on Twitter said it wasn't fair. Here in America, when the red flag comes out, you can't even look at the car in most racing series, or you're going to get a penalty. It's definitely a rule that needs to be changed. That's one of those rules that was that's in the rule book of Formula One. It's not a good rule, but it's a rule. But I think that's something that needs to be changed because it just gives somebody a free pit stop. And at the end of the day, it unfairly changes the complexity of the race for anybody.
So I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, Daryl. I am, and it has nothing to do with this race, but overall, I think I am for being able to work on the cars during a red flag scenario, and the reason being is safety. When they don't red flag races lightly. There's a lot of discussion that goes on back and forth before they make that call. And I think that if they red flag a race, honestly, that every car should be required to change tires. I don't think that there should be a discussion about teams that take tires versus not. I think it should be mandatory because these cars travel so fast and rely on so much grip out of those tires. And if one person has a puncture, we've all seen it. Grosjean 2 years ago. We've seen where, a tire failure, not necessarily Grosjean, he didn't have a tire failure, but a single car accident can have very, very disastrous consequences. And I would like to see it as a mandatory change. But I didn't like the call to bring out the red flag so late. Like they had gone around like two full laps and then they threw it, and I disagreed with that. And I kind of thought it was a cheap thing too, but we can talk about Valtteri Bottas's slowdown too, because I think that played a huge part in Red Bull deciding not to stop.
Yeah, and for some reason that wasn't called. Bottas did that a couple times where he was slow in front of Max. We saw that when they came back, or he basically slowed up the field. When they came back to do the restart, he also did it, but apparently that wasn't a penalty because it wasn't a formation lap. The rules got really interesting in how they were called, so to speak. And Bottas may have actually changed the complexity of the race by slowing up Verstappen so much, because he probably would have pitted with them, which would have kept the field level. Instead, things changed, and then the restart happened. And then we had, on that initial restart, or that second restart, actually, no, we'll call it the first restart is what we'll call it, because there were 3 standing starts in the race. During that second start, we have the kerfuffle going into turn 1 where Esteban Ocon ended up getting the lead for a little bit because Verstappen just, ended up leaving the track, parks it in the middle of the track as Hamilton's coming through, and allows Ocon through. Verstappen takes the spot, and then there's the big wreck with Perez and Nikita Mazepin. I think one of the Williams went up the back of Nikita because they just couldn't see. That was terrifying. That goes into the safety aspect of the racetrack we were talking about. But the really concerning part was they played the audio discussing whether or not Max was going to give the spot back. And Massey comes on the radio offering Max to start in grid position 3, even though it was a clear overtake off the racetrack. Now, there's been a lot of conversation about Max's antics and how they've been officiated, especially in these last few races. The non-call at Brazil really infuriated people when he pretty much made no opportunity or no attempt to really take the corner the way it's supposed to be taken, but that's neither here nor there. Lewis ended up winning the race. But it comes off, and I'm going to put my cynical hat on here for just a minute. It comes off as we know how this championship is played for Formula One in the ratings, and it feels like they're trying to do things to keep the ratings going, for lack of a better term, and offering someone to, give up the position they took illegally just comes off as a poor look.
Yes, it does. It definitely. It almost felt like Massey didn't know what he was doing throughout the whole ordeal. He definitely lacked that decisiveness that Charlie Whiting had, because it almost felt like the decisions he had to make, he didn't want to make. And it just kind of came off as a bit like greenhornish. Like he didn't, like he's new, he's rookie, he's never done this type of stuff before. But what we really needed was for somebody to really be decisive and say, "Hey, you did this. You pushed him off the track. You give this spot back, or I'm a black flag you, and you're gonna have to be disqualified." Just clear decisiveness, and that's what I think he was lacking tonight.
And Teran, you've seen controversial calls and controversial no calls in other professional sports. I don't know what the calls are like in volleyball, but there've probably been some calls on the line that probably should have been made. But have you ever heard of a referee bartering a penalty with a team?
I don't think so, but in volleyball, there are challenges and there's also instant replay. And I kind of wonder if there's any instant replay for Formula One or NASCAR or any of that sort that could sort out the problem and deal out the punishments on who caused what crash and whatnot, and who should be penalized in terms of times or who should be disqualified in terms of time. So yeah, it's rather interesting to say the least when it came to this whole crashing into things, especially when you're on a dangerous track such as the Abu Dhabi track. So this whole thing has rather been interesting, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Chris, I think we said it then when we were texting back and forth that this was not a good look for Formula One.
No, it definitely wasn't. And this is going to be the first time that I reference the Missed Apex podcast, which for anybody who likes Formula One specifically, Missed Apex does a very good job. And so there was 2 points that they made, and just so everybody knows, they are an English podcast. They acknowledge their Hamilton bias. But one of the things that they had said was that we have not always had access to the FIA radio. Mm-hmm. So therefore, this offering of deals may not be as unusual as people think. Historically, we have never heard the back and forth between teams and race control. And so there's no way for us to know this is the first time this has happened, that it's not business as usual behind the scenes. So that was one thing that I thought was a fair assessment on that. However, it is the first time we heard it on a broadcast, therefore controversial. And the other thing that they had said, in all fairness to the situation, was that the race was red flagged before Verstappen would have even been able to give the position back. Therefore, it seemed like a reasonable compromise to say, hey, rather than get in the race and then you give it back, what do you guys think about just dropping back now, restarting in third and going from there? And I think when you take the bigger context of the whole situation and the fact that the race was red flagged before a decision could be made, I think that they ultimately made the right choice by saying, like, hey, we can either do this, the stewards can do it later, or you can just do it now. And so I think when you take the greater context of the situation, it makes more sense. I think it could have been explained better, and I don't fault Sky Sports for that. But I think the sanctioning body could have came out with a clear explanation for that, and I think that people would have taken it in a better light.
Well, also the way Massey said it, it almost sounded like if they didn't give the position back, that he was just going to keep it and there wasn't going to be a penalty. So that probably caused a little bit of the confusion as well. But this sort of communication lapse kind of led into the big moment of the race, which was the brake check or not. And I know the race put out a video about the telemetry about what happened there. All Things F1 also did an article about the telemetry of that incident on lap 37. And we can get into whether or not it was a brake check, all day, every day. But that belies the bigger problem here. The officiating call was far too slow. It didn't get to Mercedes quick enough. And it contributed to the incident. And whether or not you want to say it was a Verstappen incident or a Hamilton incident, you can also have that argument. But the bigger problem is that, again, it was a Massey incident. And Massey could not stay out of the way during this race, unfortunately.
Yeah. It was just one of those deals where I think it was 100% preventable. And it just comes down to communication. At my job, every year during our performance reviews, at the end of the year, our company says, this is what we think of you. What do you think of us? And every year, it is always the same thing. Communication could be better from top to bottom. And I think at the end of the day, on track, yes, you can assign fault to one driver or the other, and really depends on who your driver is. If you're a Verstappen fan, then this was Lewis's fault. If you're a Lewis fan, this was Max. But at the end of the day, this was race control, not communicating effectively with the teams. Red Bull was told, you're going to have to give that position back. And they said, okay, we're going to do it now because we need time to take the lead back. And in the time that Red Bull had, one, heard that they needed to give that position back, and two, communicated it effectively to Max, and they strategized it. Like, I don't know if you've heard, but they came out and said, like, yeah, we told Max, like, this is where you're going to do it because this gives us the best chance of taking the position back. So Red Bull had enough time.
The DRS zone.
Exactly. So Red Bull had enough time to effectively communicate and strategize the move, and Mercedes didn't even know it was happening yet. So you tell me who is really at fault here. If it was communicated effectively and Lewis knew more than 2 milliseconds before he hit the back of Max's car, I still think that it would have been a messy issue because neither one wanted to be behind the other at the DRS.
No, they didn't. And showed.
And that comes up to my solution part of my notes, Daryl, so we'll talk about that. But I think it's all communication, and I think this was 100% preventable. And because it's Formula One and we have to assign blame, Michael Massey, this is your fault. You have been found responsible.
And Teran, it's like one team getting a holding call and the other team not finding out about it until 2 seconds where they snap the ball in football is what it felt like.
Yeah, and I actually definitely agree with Chris's point when it came to this could have been preventable, just because communication is everything, and every team needs to know what's the deal and what's the scenarios and what's going on and whatnot. Just because no one wants to be penalized, obviously, everyone wants to win the race. Let's get that out of the way, but everyone needs to be protected and safe and whatnot. And I think this could be a black eye for Formula One if everyone just takes this the wrong way and if someone really gets hurt and whatnot. So I don't know how long racer safety or driver safety has been a thing when it comes to Formula One or a problem, but they have to figure it out soon, because I feel someone could be facing a big lawsuit or any of that sort of thing if someone does really get hurt badly.
And unfortunately, Michael, this has really thrown a black eye on what's been, until now, an exciting championship fight.
Yeah, it's definitely thrown it's definitely thrown the championship fight in some type of disarray. Hey, and I really wanted to go into Abu Dhabi hyped, but I really can't, because I just think there's gonna be some type of crazy stuff that's gonna happen. And the way they've been officiating F1, I don't think it has been good. I felt like they were too harsh when they should have been too lenient. When they should have been lenient, I feel like they were too lenient when they should have been harsh. I feel like it's been inconsistent, and I think they really need to look over they really need to reevaluate what needs to happen in the officiating body in order for me to feel excited.
And I've got some thoughts about that as well. I guess we can go into that now before we get into the race and what we think is going to happen in Abu Dhabi. But before then, you mentioned black eye. That's going to pale in comparison if what we think is going to happen turn one, lap one of Abu Dhabi.
Please tell me we're all not thinking the same thing.
We are, but do it. Well, to that point, Formula One already sat down with both of them and basically stated, if you intentionally wreck somebody, they're going to take the points away from you.
I mean, look at Schumacher. He did it once, didn't do it again, even though he tried.
Well, he did it twice, but on the second time, which is 97.
Twice. Well, yeah. So he did it twice. It worked out for him one time. It did not work the second time.
Yeah, in 97, they actually stripped the second place from him completely. So Formula One has already stated, basically, they've told him don't touch each other. Whether or not they listen, God only knows. I mean, these are two aggressive race car drivers. One's trying to become the winningest world drivers champion of all time. The other one's trying to win his first. It is no secret these teams don't like each other. It's a high probability this championship is going to be decided by the FIA and not by the drivers at this point.
Yeah, and I think all this chatter about Max potentially wrecking Lewis, it all comes from the media hype. I don't think that that Red Bull is really going to do that. I think while I think that Horner would do it, I don't think he would put Max in the position to do it. If Horner was in that car, he's going full send corner one, and he's winning that based on the wins column. But I don't think he's going to ask Max's young driver to potentially sabotage and put a smear on his entire very bright career ahead of him. And I don't think he's going to have Max win his first championship through controversy. That being said, I think a lot of the media hype comes from an interview, or at least a clip where Max said that if he was in Senna's shoes, he would have done the same thing and wrecked who was it? He wrecked somebody.
Prost.
He just Prost, yeah. He yeeted the hell out of Prost, won the championship, and Max said if I was in his shoes, I would have done it too. But at the time, it was okay because it hadn't been done before. Just straight up yeeting somebody to win a championship, and then Michael tried it and it didn't work. And so therefore, I don't think that they're going to try it. They would never get the championship. It would be stripped from them instantly.
It'd probably be stripped before we ended the race.
Yeah, I think they would just disqualify him and just hand the trophy right over to Lewis. So I think that is so far from the truth. If anything, you're going to see secondary drivers or affiliate teams playing a part in this track or in this race.
So, like if Verstappen and Hamilton were to crash, they would just take the points too. Because
one
if
of them
Lewis doesn't finish, he still wins on points. Verstappen.
Yeah, the problem is I can't even say if it's a racing incident because I've said this ad nauseum. Formula One has decided to officiate all accidents like regular traffic accidents, so there's always going to be somebody at fault. So if they deem one of them at fault and it takes both of them out, somebody's going to lose the point so the other can win the championship is basically what's going to happen. And I don't like that type of officiating because these two are going to be throwing hands at each other for the entire race, and a racing incident that we would know of it in America is going to cost somebody a championship in Europe. And I don't like that, but that's a story for another day. Chris, you said and we're going to move quite along because we weren't supposed to be here the entire hour, and it's getting a little bit late in the day, but that's just how complicated this race has been. You had a couple of fixes for this, and I kind of want to hear those, so share that with us, and we'll give our opinions when we get ready for Abu Dhabi and get on out of here.
So one of them was the mandatory tire changes on a red flag. I think that's a safety issue, and I think that if they're going to red flag it, they do not allow teams if there's an incident where they think that they could throw a yellow flag, they do not let teams down the pits.
I was literally thinking that in the car. Sorry to cut you off, but
almost like NASCAR, how they close the pits and they're only open after such a thing. And I saw in the media that a lot of them, like Lando has come out and said that they didn't think that it was right. And you guys probably remember Justin Haley's Daytona win, where Kurt Busch was livid because NASCAR said, like, yep, this is just a regular caution. We're going back racing. And Kurt Busch and part of the field come down, grab tires, and then they bring them all right down, red flag the race, end up calling it Justin Haley wins. And this is a very similar situation. It is purely luck of the draw. Lewis and quite a few other drivers, they went down for a stop. They got new tires, and the risk that they ran when they did it was a red flag. And with an incident like they had, I don't see how some of the teams couldn't have saw a red flag coming. When the barrier was all messed up, they had to have known, like, we're not going back until that barrier is fixed. But anyway, so that was fix one, was closing pit lane, and then on a red flag scenario, everybody has a mandatory tire change. And then the second one, and this is a little bit maybe controversial, but it would be a fix, is that in each sector of the track, there's a designated penalty swap area where it's away from DRS. So in this situation, you had Max, who was told by his team, like, you need to let him pass before you hit the DRS zone. And Lewis, who knew what was they had to have known as he's coming up on him. And Lewis did not want to give up the DRS to Max. He wanted the DRS. So you take that right out of the equation, and either they give the position up at the end of the DRS run, diving into the corner, or there's just a designated area of the track where it's far enough away from DRS where there's not no advantage or disadvantage to giving up the spot. It is just a designated corner or whatever where you say that's where the switch happens, and then it's fair for everybody. And if the driver starts braking in that area, like to a point where you're like, what's going on ahead of them? It's like, okay, they're probably giving me the spot for some reason, especially if you knew they did you dirty.
I kind of agree with that, and I would extend it a little bit to where the FIA needs to tell them, look, you're going to give it here, not wait for the teams to decide. Because that's one of the big issues that I think I've had with the FIA officiating, where, let's take the 5-second penalties in pit road. It's up to the teams to time it. Now, of course, nobody's going to try to do anything foolish because the FIA is watching, but why is there not an FIA person down there with a stopwatch checking the time and when it's 5 seconds, directing them, now you can work on the car? I don't understand why all these penalty calls are team-centric when the FIA has the stewards to do this. It should be the stewards directing the race, not the officials basically saying, well, you need to serve this penalty at your earliest convenience. Like, no, you serve this penalty within this set of, we've given you the penalty, you got 2 laps to serve it or you're done. Like, NASCAR does not negotiate with the teams like on the speeding penalties. They're like, well, okay, in 20 laps you can come down and do the spot. No, it's you serve this penalty right now or we're going to stop scoring you. And I need the FIA stewards to run the actual race is basically what I'm asking them to do.
You're asking too much.
Apparently.
In NASCAR, they have 2 laps from when they're told to do it, right? It's like 2 or 3 laps or something.
Yeah, it's 2 or 3 laps, so they stop scoring you.
Yep. And so, like, I understand, like, hesitating a lap, maybe 2, but I mean, from the position of I have to give this position up, I want to do it as early as possible. And give myself, especially if I've got a faster car, I want to give it up the minute I know about it. And that's why I think there should be designated areas of the track where the stewards come on and say, hey, you need to give this position up in sector 2 on the next lap. And then they come on and they do it to both teams simultaneously. In sector 2 of the next lap, position switch.
Yep.
And if there's a designated zone where that happens, like maybe 2 or 3 corners, the drivers know this is where I need to take that position back. And if you miss it, now the other driver, like, they can't slam the brakes and not take it. Then that obviously that's a different scenario. But yeah, I don't see how having designated areas could go wrong.
Teran, Michael, your thoughts, then we're going to get ready to wrap up.
I'll let Teran go first.
Okay, well, I've always known that Mercedes and then Lewis have always been the dominant team when it comes to Formula One, but I kind of have to wonder, do you all think that Mercedes's grip on the Formula One world is starting to loosen, just because Verstappen did lead most of the way and then throughout most of the season other than April, and then a few penalties have hurt Verstappen and then eventually have cost him the lead and could possibly cost him the entire race. So I kind of have to wonder if Mercedes is starting to lose its luster, or maybe this was just a little bit of a fluke, or this is going to, or maybe it's a bit of a conspiracy theory or whatnot, because it's kind of mind-boggling that Verstappen had the lead for most of the race, then suddenly he starts to like wilt and loosen his lead quite a bit. So it's just something I like to know from you all.
Well, it's definitely going to loosen next year when we get the 2022 cars, because we have no idea who's going to be up top. But it really feels like they lost a little bit coming into this year, and it took them a little bit longer to find it than more recent years.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and I just wanted your little input on that. But all in all, I don't know how to say this for Verstappen, but I think he might have been the big loser when it came to last week's race. I mean, there could have been other losers, and if you all think there are other losers in that race, you are more than welcome to say. But I think the biggest loser was Verstappen.
Mm-hmm. Chris,
Yeah.
you're muted.
Oh, am I?
You're good now. You're good now. You were muted at the start.
Okay. I think that if you had to put as a driver on the track, I would say that Verstappen definitely had the worst week. But I think if you had to pick a loser for this race, it would be Michael Massey and the stewards and everybody who is not on that track, because they just completely fumbled it. And then in reference to your previous question, I think that the Lewis and Mercedes dominance is starting to crumble because they've really never had the competition that Red Bull has put forth this year. It's something we've talked about all year, with Mercedes' strategy seeming to always be behind Red Bull, and races where it comes down to race strategy, Red Bull's always been ahead all season, and it's because Mercedes has never really had to have superior strategy. They just won based on pure speed and Lewis and Valtteri's talents. And this year they were given a run for their money. And right up until about 2 months ago, Texas really is, and I mean, Max won Texas, but that's where you really saw the silver arrows start to pierce the Red Bull veil, and kind of take back this championship race. And I think Michael and Daryl would agree, because we've talked about it all year, or well, at least the last couple months anyways. But Red Bull is definitely kind of winning the end of the turbo hybrid area. And it's going to be interesting to see who takes over, because I don't think it'll be Red Bull or Mercedes who take the reins next year. I think you're looking at Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin. Those three are going to be the big ones fighting because of the title fight this year.
It's going to be wide open next year, because I know those Mercedes and Red Bull spent a lot on trying to win this championship, and it's going to cost them the start of next year, I believe.
Now, I think another thing that's worth noting is that it seemed like Mercedes really didn't care about the title this year until Lewis publicly called them out and said, I need new parts. And then since then, a couple weeks, maybe a month after Lewis said that, that's when you started seeing Mercedes pick up some speed. But if Lewis doesn't call them out publicly, I think Max already has this race sealed up a couple races ago. I think he's already championship.
I think it was after France he started saying that, and then things changed after that, and they started fighting back, and now here we are. So we're up against it. So we're coming into Abu Dhabi. Who do you guys think wins the F1 World Drivers' Championship? We know that the constructors, barring a major catastrophe, is going to go to Mercedes. Who brings home that Drivers' Championship?
Michael, you've been quiet. Why don't you go first?
I want to say Lewis Hamilton, especially after this race. I'm sorry, but Max Verstappen, it's not his on-track actions. It's more so as how he's been to the press that makes me want to say, yeah, I don't really want you to win this championship. But I definitely want Hamilton to win it. I think 8-time champion, greatest all time. I think that'll be great. And I think that'll be a great send-off for when he retires in these next coming years. What about you guys?
I'll let Chris go, and then I'll give.
I was gonna let Teran go.
Yeah, Teran.
All right. I mean, I'll take Lewis Hamilton. I think he's going to win it, and I think he's resurged back from this whole little Verstappen debacle. I think Verstappen kind of blew his chances last week, and now it's put him behind the 8 ball, and I think Lewis Hamilton is in a prime position to win the whole thing, and I think he's going to do it.
Fair enough. Looks like there's only one of us here today. So I really think Lewis will win, but I'm going to say Max because I feel like I'm obligated to. And here's the reason why. When it comes to, I think that this is going to come to some wheel-to-wheel racing, some real aggressive, combative, and almost dirty racing. Realistically, I think it does. And it's going to be in the opening couple laps, and no one does it better than Max. And not to really be on the, Max train too much, but when it comes to knowing the limits of their car, in regards to how the absolute maximum you can push that car, Lewis is great, but Max is generational. He just, the placement of the cars is crazy. And I think that is going to lead to some hurt feelings because he knows the absolute limit that he can race a person in combat style racing. And something that I thought was really interesting was that at one point in time, it was considered unsporting to dodge a punch in boxing. Unsporting. They thought that it was messed up, not part of the rules. And then now it's commonplace. And I think that Max's style of driving is dodging a punch in early days boxing. I think it's going to become the future because that's what it's going to take to win championships. You have so many young drivers coming up right now. Lando, George, Charles Leclerc. I mean, you've got a great group of youngsters. And I think that Max is going to be the best of them all when we look back on their careers. And it's because of how aggressive he is okay with being and how he knows to stretch what he's capable of within the rule set. And that's why he's not very penalized very often for his extremely aggressive driving. And it's because he pushes the rule to the absolute limit. And I think that that's what's going to win this championship, is a move that nobody likes, but wins him a championship.
We'll see what happens, but I think, especially with the changes that they just did to the Abu Dhabi circuit, it's trending towards Mercedes. And this is going to be the first time in a while that Mercedes has had the engine turned up at Abu Dhabi. We know Lewis is locked in, and we know he's not listening to the noise, judging by the sweater he had on going into the track today. I do think it's going to be Lewis Hamilton picking up that 8th World Drivers' Championship and probably getting ready to draw down his career. But we're going to get ready to draw down this special episode of The Extra Mile. I want to thank Teran, Chris, and Michael for joining me here on short notice. We almost didn't do this tonight due to a situation with the day job with myself. Court cases have a life of their own, but thankfully things worked out. We probably will not be back next week.
We probably will.
Unless something absolutely earth-shattering happens, we will not be back next week. And even then, we'll probably figure out a way to do something in a different format if something happens. I don't want to keep dragging people back because we're supposed to be on vacation. But hey, check out Set Point with Teran. Comes up tomorrow, 7 o'clock in the East, 4 in the West. And if you want to check out any other iSports Radio show, to keep it locked right here, thespeaker.com/iSportsRadio, and check out the website, iSportsRadio.com. And remember, if you missed any episode of any iSports Radio show, check it out anywhere where podcasts can be heard, and on the YouTube channel where we've got a collection of episodes from years and years and years ago. So make sure you check that out as well. So for Michael, Teran, and Chris, thank you guys so much for joining us for this special episode of The Extra Mile. We'll see you guys in 2022 for the next green flag. Have a wonderful evening.